Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A and news stream. We are going to be getting into all of the latest news from the world of Star Wars, which this week is a bit of an uptick in news. Still nothing too crazy in terms of Skeleton Crew news, but we do have a few things to talk about, including the return of a fan favorite character from Ewoks. And then also, we will be getting into a lot of the reveals from New York Comic Con around the latest Star Wars comics. So, yes, a Comic Con is actually about the comics this time, and they have announced quite a few new series as well as some continuations and some new covers. And so we're going to talk about all of that, but of course, as always, this is a live Q&A. So, as a lot of you have done already, you can send in your chats to the chat room here, and then we will get to them first come, first serve. If you don't know the drill, we'll go from top to bottom, but a super chat will guarantee your comment on tonight's stream, and it will also bump it up to the top. So we will get to it as soon as possible and then get to everybody else's who haven't paid for a super chat. All right, so without further ado, let's get in to the first topic here. And that is going to be kind of a general overview of some of the new information we've heard about Skeleton Crew. So there hasn't been any crazy new information about plot, but what we have seen are a handful of new images, which again, make the show just look extremely good. The sets, the production design, the creature effects, everything just looks so high quality in this show. And it's just continuing to get me really, really excited for this. A show that I have been on record saying that I could give or take, the concept when they announced it. Now that we're starting to see it, now that it's starting to look like it's just so different, it's so unique, a very clear, cohesive vision. I'm pretty darn excited for Skeleton Crew as we're ramping up in the month leading up because we have just a little over a month and what, 12 days until Skeleton Crew debuts, which is kind of crazy. We're that close. It's been a long time coming. I mean, this is one of the biggest gaps we've ever had for a Star Wars show. And then, as I alluded to earlier, if you guys have seen the Ewoks movies, specifically the second one, Ewoks Battle for Endor, there's a character that was pretty iconic for being kind of an ugly looking style Ewok. He's not an Ewok, but his name's Teak, and he runs really fast, and he's friends with Wilford Brimley. Uh, this character is coming back, and Teak is going to be in Skeleton Crew, which I think is awesome. We've embraced a lot of the, should we say, lesser side of the early 80s Star Wars fandom with or material with a lot of holiday special references and stuff coming into The Mandalorian. And now we have these Ewoks movies, which are infinitely better than the holiday special. But if you watch them nowadays, they definitely don't hold up, certainly 80s TV level quality. But Teak is one of the more fun designs. And actually, I kind of saw this coming, not necessarily in Skeleton Crew, but I was just in Disneyland and they have had merchandise for Teak for a while now, for like the last 3 or 4 months. They're selling Teak dolls. And I thought this is super random to sell Teak dolls. And you're not even why he's a character that is from a niche 80s TV movie and you're selling them in the theme parks. But now we have at least a little information on maybe why he's coming back. And we have a quote from, who is this from? From Empire Magazine, uh, that says, or who were they talking to? They were talking to David Lowery, one of the directors from Skeleton Crew. And David Lowery said, I was most excited about having hand puppets on set. It's the most ancient technology being used, the most cutting edge technology simultaneously. That combination was absolutely magical. There's a character in my episode that's the Teak from Battle for Endor, and it's just a little hand puppet. It's just wiggles its hands. I was like, is he gonna get digitized and touched up or replaced? No, in the final episodes, it's just a hand puppet in the middle of a crazy volume set. The cognitive dissonance of seeing those two things together live in front of you is absolutely incredible. So, just, again, hammering home how many practical effects we're using. We're going back to the 80s style. A very fun creature. So those are our big Skeleton Crew news. Sonic, what are your thoughts on Teak coming back and some of the new images we've seen from Skeleton Crew?
Well, I will say it is, like you said, kind of nice that we're embracing just some really weird parts about the fandom, about these older Star Wars legacy puppets and ideas and concepts. I think when people watch just the original Ewok movies, you're like, "Ah, man, that's not so hot. That's a little rough." They're like, why is this considered like the big Star Wars material after after the movies ended? And now looking back at it, like, yeah, it was weird. It's not great. It doesn't always work, right? But it's still nice to appreciate that this was in some ways like the continuation, the extension of Star Wars as we knew it for a lot of people. And even if it wasn't anything perfect, it isn't developed in the same way that we think about interconnected intermedia franchises, it's still fun to recognize like some of the cool things they do. And especially with the Forest Moon of Endor, like it just is, like the Sierra National Park. That's kind of all it feels like and in the movies, right? But then you see in the Ewok movies and the cartoons, it's full of life, so many different creatures, cultures, right? And there's always like nice, fun little things that even later EU and early canon has been like kind of pushing, like, no, no, like these are still around, these are still things. So I'm pretty happy that we get something as ugly as it may be. It's nice to see Teak, and it is one of those puppets that feels very 80s, but somehow will also work in this Skeleton Crew vibe with these strange, almost like outlandish creatures and aliens that these kids are going to be interacting with. And it'll be interesting to see because we do have a character that isn't necessarily, um, I don't know if we want to call him the same species quite yet as Max Reba, like a Nautilin, not Nautilin. I'm blanking on his species name here, but uh, what is it? What is it? But yeah, there's the rumors that it might be like a branch off species. It's not the same one. But it'll be interesting to see like these interactions between different aliens and groups without feeling like super othered and all that, which I think some of these like 80s films definitely make you feel because there's only like one human or two humans that you have to interact with, and everyone else is just strange and weird and bizarre. So it'll be interesting if Teak will be played a little bit more seriously or more of the Ewok film characterizations. I don't know. It'll be fun. I'm excited regardless. I don't know what to say other than I'm glad that people are still remembering these details because I hope in like 10, 15 years we look back on Endor as the Force Moon of Endor and we'll think about it like we did in the late 80s, early 90s, where it's like it was full of life. And we get to see these cool things. And I think the Ewoks have kind of made a comeback with like the Battlefront 2 Ewok hunt mode, the Ewok tie-in comic to old things with the Battle Jakku. It's fun kinda seeing them get a resurgence, get real development, but, like, not ignore, like, some of the sillier, more fantastical elements about them.
Yeah, and this is the perfect type of series to bring this type of creature back because it is something that fits in the more grounded, practical style with the puppetry that we've already seen. I mean, we're having main characters who are aliens, and that is pretty exciting. It's something I think we've asked for a while, especially aliens that aren't humanoid. Like, we've had Ahsoka, but to have Ortolans and to have whatever this owl creature is, have these different aliens who are going to be leading some of the bigger scenes or play big parts in a Star Wars show. I think it's pretty exciting. So lots of cool stuff from Skeleton Crew. I mean, we've got to be close to a trailer at some point here. We're
Oh, yeah.
almost a month away. Disney Plus usually ramps up their marketing about a month away. I believe Agatha has one or two episodes left. I haven't been following it. But once that's over, I would imagine it's full steam ahead on Skeleton Crew, and then we'll start seeing a lot more information. We'll get probably character breakdowns like we did for Acolyte before that show dropped. We'll get another trailer that should probably show us a lot more of the settings and the vibe and the costumes and all that type of stuff. So I think we're in for just a bit, like maybe 2 more weeks of little tidbits until we finally get like a full drop and massive information on Skeleton Crew. So keep in touch with us and keep following these streams, and hopefully we get it soon and we can cover it as soon as we hear. But our next Star Wars story here, or we have actually a few comments about this, do we? Let's check the chat here before we move on. Nobody really talking about Teak. If you guys have any thoughts on Teak or some of the other news about Skeleton Crew, let us know in the comments. But we'll move on to the second story here, and then we're going to get to your guys' comments. We have a lot of information from the New York Comic Con, including the announcement of a couple new series. The one that I think most of us are most excited for, because they released an incredible art piece for it, is Marvel's new Star Wars Jedi Knights series, which is going to be coming starting next year. That is a very exciting cover for those of you who have seen it, or it's not a cover, but it's kind of a piece of art that's representing the entire series. Very much so in vein of the new Mace Windu book that came out, and then we also have variant covers released for the Yoda cover and the Adigalia cover, I believe, or is that Stas Ali? I always can't. It's so hard to tell them apart. I think it's Adigalia because of the blue lightsaber. I believe Stas has a green lightsaber. Um, so they released the covers for those two, and those look exactly like the Mace Windu covers. So this is going to be an exciting new push forward for Jedi Knights, and it's coming from Marvel too. Which Marvel, we know they're starting to end a lot of these series that are coming out. It's taking a big step forward for them, and going back to the prequels, which, frankly, we haven't done too well in Marvel Comics under Disney. A lot of the early attempts with like the original Mace Windu miniseries weren't that great, but there's some return to form this year for sure for prequel stories. So continuing off the year of the Phantom Menace, and now approaching Attack of the Clones, it is really cool to have a Jedi Knights focused series. I mean, we see in the pit arts, you have Dooku, you have characters from all over. So it's not just going to be Phantom Menace era. It's not just going to be between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. It's going to be all over the prequels with a lot of different Jedi Knights. Sonic, when you saw this, what were your thoughts initially?
I mean, it's just a beautiful cover image. That's a way to sell it, right? Like
Yeah.
there is very few things that comic books will like, entice necessarily people outside of that medium. And this is something that really plays on like, Star Wars 1998 and the vibes that people have from that. Definitely plays onto the prequel vibes, like you said, the 25th anniversary. That's a huge thing for so many of us of the Phantom Menace, right? So there is a lot of prequel love just abound. But I think also the covers are nice because it kind of matches with that new Mace Windu series, miniseries that dropped this year, which wasn't great, but it was still solid. It wasn't terrible. It felt like maybe like almost like a step up towards what they were building with the very very fun Glass Abyss that we just finished reading and put up on a review for our channel. So I am pretty pleased by like this big push to kind of go back to that Phantom Menace era of like, oh my god, this is an order, the High Council of Jedi. What are their stories, right? And of course, we started this year with the Living Force. That was really fun. I think the criticism you can make for that story is that you're jumping so much between everyone's point of views that there isn't necessarily as strong of a drive and plot with the main villains and the events kind of going on there. And that's fair to say, but I think the comics here will be able to really highlight each master and kind of build off some of the characterization that they've now really entrenched with canon, really entrenched with what's going on here, in canon moving forward with comics, and maybe even have some nice little fun connections to things that we haven't necessarily heard or even seen in Legends. I think the one thing that really really got me hyped was that there is rumors, or if not rumors, I think it's just a straight fact that there is the character from like that was planned as of a Kenner line after episode 6 was supposed to be like this villain. that Star Wars Lucas shot down at that point. I'm looking up the name of the character. I'm blanking here. What? I saw someone talk about it recently, uh, but that character, the toy model, everything. I think Agate Prime or something like that.
Oh yeah,
I'm trying.
Aetha Prime, I
Aetha
think.
Prime, right? And
Yeah.
we're gonna have them be the like main villain, which I think is really cool. It's nice that we're doing something that even Legends didn't really get to do. It really was like, hey, we're gonna start developing this. We're gonna do something with a totally different time period than intended, but now we can put our full original stamp on this character in a way that Legends never got a chance to, and we get to do it with these characters that are beloved. And a lot of the early PTEU got a chance to play around with, but once we started to move into Attack of the Clones, once we kind of readjusted, we're kind of forgotten about. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. I think if you guys look up the character design for Eighth Prime, it's very what's the character from Buzz Lightyear, Zorg or whatever?
Zerg.
Zerg, yeah, like he looks very Zerg-esque, I will admit, but I think that works actually quite a bit better with the prequel aesthetics than it does necessarily in a post Return of the Jedi world. So yeah, I am pretty excited. So I am quite pleased. And then Guggenheim is also working on this, and he kind of helmed the Yoda and Han Solo and Chewbacca miniseries this past year or two, and I found those both quite underrated. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, the writing I think should be all right. Mark Guggenheim hasn't done anything yet that I've been blown away by in Star Wars comics, but I think he's ready to take that next step. This is a type of series, though, as excited as I am about the arts and about the time period and about the fact that even characters like Dooku are going to be in there. I do hope it does have an end game like they're saying it does, and I do hope this isn't, a disguised maxi series where it's gonna end after, like, 12 issues like Han Solo and Chewbacca, or they announce it as an ongoing and then eventually cancel it, because this would be something awesome to go for 50 issues or 25 issues at least, I hope that is the direction they take. Can't guarantee anything really in today's world of comics, but I really hope that is where they're going. They're saying it's going to start with different duos of Star Wars Jedi and then jump into an overarching story. I hope that our overarching story is interesting enough to keep it going because as much as one shots are fun, we've had so many Star Wars comics that are either mini series or a series of one shots or a series of flashbacks that kind of connect to the modern day, like a Galaxy's Edge or like the Life Day one shot. And I'm just kind of tired of that style. So hopefully this has a larger presence, a larger narrative. But yeah, it's very, very cool. I think this is going to be a pretty awesome series. And I'm hoping they continue uh, building out the future of Star Wars comics here as we start to wrap up a lot of the bigger things that have been dominating Star Wars comics for the last 4 or 5 years. We also have some more news from Dark Horse, including upcoming Hyperspace Stories graphic novels. The Qui-Gon one is now pushed to next year. It was supposed to come out the beginning of this year, and it got pushed all the way to March 2025. So that one is coming. They also have announced Grievous Hyperspace Stories and Mace Windu Hyperspace Stories, as well as an upcoming Bad Batch Ghost Agents, which is coming out in a miniseries that's starting in January. We've got a pretty cool piece of art for the High Republic Adventures, which I think is pretty awesome. And then we do have a Poe Dameron comic returning. And this is pretty exciting, although there's very little information on it. I don't think they've announced whether it is a one shot, a miniseries, an ongoing, a maxi series, but it is from Ethan Sachs, who wrote the Bounty Hunter comic. And that one is a lot of dumb fun. Uh, I think Poe Dameron and kind of dogfighting style, X-Wing style stories can definitely be part of that dumb fun. It's a matter of where it takes place because Charles Soule's original Poe Dameron run is a more underrated Star Wars comic. I've never personally thought it was great, but it is pretty good, and people don't really talk about it amongst the ongoings that we had. Excuse me. And it is nice to return to this type of character who has basically gotten all of his character development in comics, outside of the movies. So I'm happy to have Poe back, and it's a pretty great piece of art. And Ethan Sachs is a solid writer. I'd like to see him take a step, ahead of bounty hunters, like you always said, Seneca, about Fast and Furious with bounty hunters, and just when you read bounty hunters and knowing the style, I think he wrote bounty hunters knowing what it was. But I wonder and I hope that he can take, another step up and it not just be kind of this standard action fare and be a little bit more in depth on a character, from the sequels that could use more padding, just like all the sequel characters. So if we're diving back into the sequels, we're fleshing out another character, especially piggybacking off of what was Charles Soule's run. Hopefully, this is another worthwhile addition to the Dameron canon.
Yeah, it's kind of strange to say that he's probably the most developed character in the EU material outside of the films, outside of sequel trilogy films. And I am a fan, a pretty big fan of what Phil Noto does with the character and everything. Like I do think there are moments that aren't, anything super fantastic or great. I'll admit that. I'm still always a little miffed that Mr. Bones kind of cameos, but not really. And I'm like, this is just a great way to like stumble into a B1 and still get the full experience, even if he doesn't have like the war paint and feathers and stuff like that. And it is a bit frustrating. I will say that the story is kind of told leading directly into the Force Awakens, and then it kind of was supposed to finish, and then it gets extended to just after the Last Jedi, and it's a hard window to work with. There is no window. You kind of have to just accept that the movies are going to tell Poe stories back to back, and then you gotta frame it around there, right? It's a really strong start for it with Lor Santeca and kind of like discovering him, Gracchus, and then the original First Order villain that I forget his name, but is a former Bal Jakku trooper. You turn
Yeah,
kind of pirate.
was it Tarek? Something
Agent
like that.
Tarek or something, yeah, and, he I thought that was really fun. It does definitely loses a bit of steam, but it's fun, and I think what people kinda criticize at first that it's not really about dogfighting. It has its moments, but it is more about, like, Black Squadron doing missions, kind of like in the vein of like a Rogue Squadron, a little bit more looser with the rules than I think Rogue Squadron ever was, where there's a little bit more proper military structure. This is more like, "We trust you, Poe, to make these decisions on like with a strike team and stuff like that," which I think that always appealed to me. That kind of does harken to that very proper EU vibe of your pilot should be capable on the field as well. And I think what this Dark Horse series, if they are really trying to push it to be like more than just fun dogfighting, it's a great avenue for Sax to kind of spread his wings a little bit and maybe explore the transition from Poe from the Cold War, New Republic Defense Fleet into working with Princess Leia, General Leia, and the Resistance, because that is a story that, through his perspective, could be really well done. That is a story that you can kind of transition the elements of his characterization. Was he always this much of a hot shot? Was he a little bit more careful around Leia? Best thing about Poe in the comics is that you understand a lot of his reasons are very valid, but things like in The Last Jedi, like, not listening to Leia, being so dead shot on we need to take down the dreadnought and everything else like that. This is a great chance to, because you can maybe see the elements of the Cold War that might have influenced more of his recklessness, but with like good reasons and good passions. Even if his the logic as a leader, as a commander, isn't quite there because he was not exactly in that position with the defense fleet and stuff like that. Like that's something I think that the comics could handle really well. Of course, a book could do it quite well as well, but I don't know how much of the Cold War itself and the transition into all these global events of like the Bloodline novel with the Leia reveal as being the daughter of Vader and stuff like that, that you want to kind of really push into a comic book. But seeing the defense fleet, seeing the differences, like how they reacted, were they more like appeasement and like letting the First Order kind of take more and more of their territory? Were there more outright skirmishes? We've seen and heard things, but it's really resistance. So besides that, you don't really get much. So I think this is a great opportunity to see that transition for his character in a
Mhm.
way that really can be influential and start shaping some really strong tissue to the Cold War that is fairly important to what makes the sequel trilogy work, and it just hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah, and I think another exciting thing about this is if it is at least a miniseries, hopefully an ongoing, it'll be our first real ongoing series from Dark Horse outside of High Republic that because all the other series like the Hyperspace Stories and all that, those are all kind of one-off stories each issue. And so if we have a recurring story, an arc-based comic story out of Dark Horse, this will be a big step forward for getting, even more Star Wars comics because now we'll have Dark Horse publishing big Star Wars stories and Marvel publishing big Star Wars stories. It is the thing that makes me think maybe this is just a big oversized Poe Dameron issue or maybe a 5 issue at best miniseries. But regardless, I'm excited for a lot of these things. I think seeing the variety, once again, too, like having both Hyperspace Stories, High Republic, prequel era Jedi Knight story, all the stuff we're going to do post Return of the Jedi now, and New Republic era in Marvel Comics. And then now we're getting even a Poe Dameron thing right before the sequels. We're covering everything now, which is an exciting thing for Star Wars comics, which has been so locked into the original trilogy for so long. It's great to see, the comics start to branch out across the entire franchise and really embrace everything. We're finally getting out of that early Star Wars canon mold of only embracing the original trilogy, and they've done a great job with it. They've really enhanced those movies, but now it's time to enhance other things. And to be fair to them, too, Dark Horse Comics, they were so locked in on the original trilogy originally. I mean, the prequel trilogy originally that it did make a lot of sense to kind of go the original trilogy route because we had so many comic stories in the prequel timeline, even if they are legends. Now, going back there after giving it like a 15-year break, we can, really enhance the canon side of that as well. But those were our big topics today. Let us know your guys' thoughts. And we did get a super chat from Anthony Tiff. Thank you so much, Anthony, for your continued support and for joining us through all of these live streams. Anthony says, great to have been with you guys for almost 5 months. I'm excited for the new prequel era comics. Just hope the EU purists don't ruin it. Thanks for your super chat, Anthony. We really appreciate that. And I think, if you haven't branched out into the world of canon comics and books, they're pretty safe places for people from, the typical kind of EU push that you see a lot of times when it comes to the conversation on canon versus legends. A lot of people who, make those very one-sided arguments don't really read canon. So if you get into canon groups and you read the canon books and you get to talk with a lot of the canon fans, we've had very good conversations and comments around our book reviews and stuff for canon stuff because it's pretty much only the people that actually read them or are interested in them that come there. It's certainly a good community to check out. So yeah, as canon keeps getting better and better, I definitely recommend branching off into the circles of canon comics and canon novels, the fandom circles.
No, I definitely agree. I think when we look at the comics that are around this pre-episode 1 timeline, that is where the focus is for all these characters on that Jedi Knights cover. To be fair, Star Wars 1998, I think, is not really great until it rebrands to the Republic. Like a lot of the stuff with Kiadi-Mundi is strange. It's weird. Everyone's got red and orange and yellow lightsabers. I guess you could say like there are moments that are like solid, but it was more about introducing these background characters that never get a moment to shine until really the Clone Wars. All right, you can make the argument and to some degree, like, okay, we have the 03, 05 era of Clone Wars before 08 really starts kicking in. That's true. I'm not denying that, but that was mostly books. That's not really visuals. And the great appeal, I'd say, of episode 1, Jedi Council, is the fact that they're all such different species and backgrounds. It's like this is as diverse and representative of the galaxy for the supposed end of prime of the Jedi that you can get, and some great designs. Like, you know, if you silhouette all these characters, you can still recognize them, like a Kit Fisto, a Plo Koon, and Sashi Tin, all these guys, right? And there's a strong kinetic language to them in movement, in action, with the certain lightsaber forms and all that. That I don't think 1998, those first few issues always really captured there. It's a very experimental. I think that's the thing. So I think now that we've gotten a lot of that Clone Wars from, you know, Kenny Tarkovsky and that little era, and then going to '08, and now getting that canon reset, and now we get to have the Living Force, and now these small miniseries here and there, and High Republic obviously playing a little bit more of a prequel influence. This is a great place for them to take some like real serious stabs at characterization, at story, at, you know, meaningful development for them that still feels pretty aligned with what we're going to see eventually by episode 1, by episode 2, once they kind of all start dropping off. So I think it'll be really exciting. I'm very curious personally about like the Dooku one, especially. I want to see what he's like as a Jedi on a relatively normal mission outside
Yeah.
of like Tales of the Jedi and stuff like that. So yeah, and like Liam said, our channel, at least for sure, our book reviews, our canon reviews, people are, they're engaging with it because they're reading it. You know, I can't say that I'm any better than some of these EU guys. When I was growing up, a lot of my information was from Wikipedia. There are plenty of people who read it, but there's also quite a few people who've read the synopsis of something or the character bios and all that. And that doesn't really tell you what a story is like in the medium and its execution and all that. Whereas when people are under our canon book reviews, it's kind of hard within the first 3 days of a book being released to be like, "Oh, I know everything about it, and I don't like it." It's like, well, no, you kinda have to read 500 pages in that first week, so, yeah. So I think it's always gonna be a little bit more positive, a little bit more beneficial for you to kinda check those out, and, you know, we'll try to get Battle Jakku once that first arc is done. We're gonna try to figure out a good format for you guys, give a little coverage there too, and maybe after that's finished, maybe our next big one is Jedi Knights and, you know, other series that we haven't caught up quite yet and haven't had like a proper rollout on the channel. So yeah, I know we're both really excited to read it. So definitely stay tuned.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to be really cool. So scrolling back up to the top again, thanks Anthony for the super chat. And if you would like to make sure you get a chat on tonight's show, send in a super chat. We'll answer it first. After that, we're going first come, first serve, which starts with Critical Thinker 66, who said, I recently finished The Unifying Force. It lived up to the hype. The amount of continuity nods to other books and all the plot threads they wrapped up were very satisfying. Yeah, that's James Lucino for you. He's so good at
Yeah.
keeping all the details together. Just everything he writes, everything, and the guy is unreal with encyclopedic knowledge of Star Wars. I don't know if he actually has that in real life or the guy just takes incredible notes, but he is everything he writes is so tight with the rest of the universe. Anyway, Critical Thinker says overall my favorite books in the series were Traitors, Star by Star, Unifying Force, and Edge of Victory One Conquest. Dark Journey was my least favorite. Story had a lot of potential, but the execution fell super flat. The New Jedi Order as a whole felt a lot like a superhero event comic, super fun despite its rough patches. Yeah, well, thank you for your overall review of New Jedi Order. I think you hit most of the things on the head there. I mean, those are some of the best books in the entire initiative, so you certainly have, you know, the taste that most of us have when we read the New Jedi Order. A Dark Journey as your least favorite one is a surprise. It's not one of the best books, but I don't think it's one of the weaker ones. But I can understand with it being you know, comparing it to Traitor especially, it's not as good.
Yeah.
Force Heretic would be, I think, still the weakest for me. But yeah, thank you so much for that review, and we're glad you enjoyed it. It's such a fun ride to go through that entire thing, and it is, like you said, a superhero event comic is a great comparison, especially when you read the tie-ins, because that's where New Jedi Order, you know, and where really starting to feel it with High Republic right now as well, because the High Republic is really the only comparable thing to New Jedi Order in terms of the amount of content there is. But it's a definitely a tedious effort when you read everything. Now, New Jedi Order, the difference is you have to read everything, where, you know, High Republic, you don't have to read every book. You can just stick to adult novels, or you could stick to adult and young adult, and etc. But I do think, like superhero events, there are always those extra parts that don't really feel that necessary to the overall story. And that certainly is the case for a lot of the second half of New Jedi Order, and we're starting to feel it a little bit in High Republic as well right now, where the stories are still pretty good, but they're still, they're realizing it's been 2.5 years since we've read some of this stuff. We have to catch you back up, and that can be kind of annoying on a binge, I would imagine, especially in the future. And that's been annoying when you read New Jedi Order a bit, but at least New Jedi Order was a bit tighter. But yeah, thank you overall for your review.
Yeah, not much more I can add other than, in some ways, even people who are like pure EU elitists still say The Unifying Force is kind of the book that feels like a real true end to the EU, that you've got that next generation that sacrifices the differences that make them stand out, and still great hits, great moments for legacy characters, great development for a lot of the Bantam characters who aren't really in the original plans either. And it is satisfying, and it does put Star Wars on a very different path. Unfortunately, it feels like a lot of the later series start undoing things and start treading the same ground again and again and again, and kind of ignore like some of the most impactful things, like, hey, the Vong terraformed Coruscant. It's fine in like 3 books. It's like, okay, I guess that's how it's gonna be post New Jedi Order. But yeah, Lucino is a master of the craft. It is a longer book for a reason, but I think it's a satisfying one for sure. And
Mm.
yeah, I voiced a lot of the same stuff about the High Republic. It is a little tedious, but from what we've heard and just, our first real reads at Tears of the Nameless, that feels like the first time they've stopped expanding phase 3 and catching up on a lot of phase 1 stuff. Now they're like, we're reaching endgame. And there's already signs of stuff like that happening, like the Tempest Breaker audio drama that's gonna bring in characters from the Marvel first Phase 3 comics. It's gonna bring in Eye of Darkness, obviously. It's gonna bring in Temptation of the Force. It's gonna bring in a lot of characters that have all reached kind of like an inflection point, kind of all reached their story in that same way. We'll reach Silas, obviously, with Tears of Nameless and Echoes of Fear with that comic series. So, he's starting to become a bigger player after so much time off, right? It feels like we're starting to get somewhere towards the end game, right? And I know people are saying like, let's go for phase 4, let's go phase 5. If they do it, they need a break. I think that's just a fact. Like, go flesh out stuff tangentially connected to that. Like, I know we've got the Crystal Crown or the Crystal Crow. I don't know what exactly the name of the book, with Jackie
Becky,
and
yeah.
Yord. And then obviously we got the Wayseeker, which should be pretty important because Justin Ireland's writing it and has Vernestra and India and Master Indara, right? So yeah, I think that makes more sense. Get those 2 books out of the way, maybe put some comics around that era, recalibrate the plans for that, and then start, going back to maybe phase 2 characters first and flesh out a little bit more of that exploration that the quest of the Jedi kind of promise, but never always hit outside of like maybe the Blade and some of the junior novels and stuff like that. Take your time, like plug and play the pieces that make sense after you've taken a step back, because it's been good. It's been strong, right? And you haven't had to read every single thing, but we've now reached that point where it's like it's starting to strain just a little bit since Temptation of the Force. Um, that's fine that it is mostly a romance novel, but it also just added so many new elements that now I'm glad that we didn't have to do another level of expansion. Now we're starting to narrow things in, and if it feels like we'll end on a strong note.
And then Critical Thinker follows that up saying the reason Dark Journey was one of their least favorites was because Jaina's favorite solo kid, but so much of the story of Dark Journey was focused on Hape and politics and her love life, while her vengeance quest that should have been the main focus of the book was like 5%. Yeah, and that's completely fair. Again, like I said, it's not, I don't think it's a great book, but it is, I would say it's a little better than Force Heretic. But yeah, I'm glad you have read the whole thing, and to each their own. But thank you so much. And then the next question from Critical Thinker is spoiler-free thoughts on Dark Nest trilogy. Well, Dark Nest is a complicated one. So, like you were saying, Sanak, Unifying Force feels like a conclusion, a finale. It was never obviously going to be, because Star
Yeah.
Wars is going to go forever. Um, but the way Dark Nest builds and changes characters and some of the factions, starts to transform it into some of the more controversial aspects of Legacy of the Force and of Fate of the Jedi. And as we get into that kind of second half of the post Return of the Jedi timeline in the EU, it can get muddled. I think there are some pretty cool things about the trilogy, but overall, it is certainly a step down from New Jedi Order, to say the least. Uh, but I hope you like it. If that's what you're going with next, if that's what you're reading next, I hope you do enjoy it. But yeah, that's all I'll say because I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, uh, yeah, it's a weird one because again, I'm not always a fan of like a story that is very bug centric in a way, right? Very insect like. And the Killiks are a fun concept. And they've popped up in stuff like the Old Republic and stuff like that. But there are a lot of things that become like Troy Denningisms that start getting really, really annoying and start plaguing a lot of his novels and Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi. I think the use of Alimarar is really strange, and he's already kind of gotten to the point in New Jedi Order where I don't know what it is, but he loves seeing her lose a limb or like any of his characters like get something cut off and chopped off, and she gets brutalized so much throughout New Jedi Order, and that continues here. The concept of like a hive mind, a little bit of a Twilight fetishization, which is starts becoming a little bit more apparent. He has a thing for female characters that I would say is like probably the most graphic and continuous of a lot of the EU authors, right? So not my favorite, but I think conceptually it's not bad. I think my frustration is that we needed more stories kind of bridging leading into it. This kind of just feels like almost like a Bantam-esque turn to like let's just do another new conflict, and it's a nice interesting enemy of sorts, but then there are things like I'll just say this: Electric Judgment shows up here, and I'm not a fan of that. And yeah, I think that's like epitomizes a lot of my struggles with the trilogy because there's great concepts, but they're executed in some of the worst ways.
Anthony says, having recently just listened to the audiobook of Revenge of the Sith, it was awesome. The cast was great. Hearing the part when they describe Anakin's heart as the dead star dragon was very interesting. It reminds me of that short story that Mike Chen wrote, where Anakin talks about how they called him the boy with Sun Dragon. Do you think the connection was intentional? I do. I think the connection was intentional because, especially because we were at Star Wars Celebration that year, and Mike Chen was there, Adam Christopher was there, all the authors of the new books, and they were hyping up the Revenge of the Sith novelization so much. Adam Christopher put a quote in Shadow of the Sith before the book starts from the Revenge of the Sith novelization. So yes, I think it was intentional. But I've actually never listened to the audiobook version of Revenge of the Sith. I got to give that a shot because I do love my audiobooks. So yeah, definitely worth checking out. If you give a positive endorsement, I would like to listen to that for sure.
Yeah, and Mike Chen also says you can read, Star Wars Brotherhood and count that as like the Battle of Nemoidia, one of the 10 times that Anakin supposedly saves Obi-Wan. But he's like, you don't have to. You could also read what's kind of there in Stower's book. Like there is multiple versions. He's like, I'm trying to be as connected to Stover's incredible book, which he was like gassing it up on stage. I think everyone else like was like, yeah, no, like Stover's awesome. Mike Chen is like, this is my Bible, and like this is like the North Star for me. This is where all my storytelling is still like trying to be as closely connected to, even if they're different continuities.
Okay, where were we next? Anthony says, I'm really excited to see more Star Wars comics, especially the High Republic comics. I've been reading through phase two High Republic comics. They are really good. Yeah, overall, it's pretty solid phase. I think a little bit more cohesive phase than phase one, at least from the Marvel side.
Yeah.
I thought the Dark Horse side, or at least Adventures, wasn't, it was one of my least favorite High Republic comics from overall. the Phase 2 adventures, but they also had that miniseries from George Mann, who, as I'm like 75% through Tears of the Nameless, George Mann is really carrying the High Republic right now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that one miniseries from George Mann that was really good. What was it called? It was something nameless. I keep getting mixed up with Tears of the Nameless. It's not Tears of the
Beware
Nameless. It's
Beware the
something like that.
Nameless?
Beware the Nameless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same, like pretty much the same title. That was also pretty good. So yeah, check out the Dark Horse side as well. Although Avengers isn't that great. Uh, but yeah, the Marvel stuff from Phase 2 is really solid. It goes well
Yeah.
together, and I think unlike Phase 1, where you have the like pre Tempest Runner comics and the post Tempest Runner comics. Tempest Runner, for what if you don't know, is an audiobook from Phase 1, where you have Lorna D and Avar Chris and all these characters coming out of the books and joining the fray of the comics and so on. It just kind of it feels like two different comics altogether. But there were some other good miniseries from Marvel in Phase 1. But I felt like the main line overall, while essential, and while I would recommend it to a lot of people to check out if they're interested in getting into High Republic comics, I don't necessarily think it was super cohesive like Phase 2 was.
Yeah, Phase 2 being around the Battle Jakku and that audio drama, like the way it can kind of slot in there with the perspectives that are kind of missing. Obviously, you're focused on a more specific crew and characters. Yeah, it works because it's just another thing about the whole city going into entire chaos and everything like that. So that works really well. I agree about High Republic Adventures Phase 2. Not good. It's silly, but not in a fun way. It doesn't have any real plot relevance. They're like forced to be tied into Battle Jakku at the end. They're kind of like showing up at the very end of it. It's like, okay, like I guess they were here too, just so we can say that characters have that show up in the Force Awakens and stuff like that get some knowledge and context of how long, and it's like okay, fine, yeah, whatever. But I agree, Phase 3 has been carried by George Mann. um the comics have been good. I think we forgot to give a shout out to The Blade. That was a great miniseries in Phase
Mhm.
2. That's a really great one, for Porter Engel, and it really goes into the whole bearish vow concept that Charles Soule has been developing since Darth Vader 2017. Can't wait for the Broken Blade. I don't know how that's gonna fit into Phase 3, but I'm assuming that's gonna be like one of the later projects for sure. Um, I don't know if it's gonna be some stuff because there is a lot of teases in Temptation of the Force that I don't know if they're gonna place it in Phase 3 timeline because I originally assumed they would like transition us into where we are in Phase 1, but now I'm not so sure, right? So that'll be interesting. And yeah, I agree because Phase 1 Marvel, I think, is very underrated, but it is structurally impossible to just read on its own, right? You have to have read Light of the Jedi to get the setup for why Avar Chris is in this situation, and then you have to read that comic line because then you have to then go back to why Avar only really shows up for like parts of Fallen Star and stuff like that, right? Like why is she and Stellan at such odds with each other, and why does she relieve her of being the marshal and all that, right? So Keeve, I think, is great. Skier is great. Tarek, Sarah, the twins, they're great. But yeah, it's like Avar should have stayed in the books and then had more things that are referenced. If you're gonna bring her into the comics, do what Phase 3 is doing, where it's like you repeat what's the details. You give a little bit more of her POV, maybe her mental space and stuff like that, right? Which is very crucial, honestly, to that plot. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, Breaker, or yeah, Tempest Runner was like kind of a circuitous story. Like it kind of went in. It's very much about the mental headspace and identity crisis that Lorna D has, and it still feels like you're cutting out chunks before she like makes her return. So it is a little weird, but then you have to once you finish that, you have to then jump onto the kind of the arcs that are happening. And they kind of try to do a transition arc with Orla Journey, but it's not anything super special, right? But yeah, if you want to read about like the great progenitor and the Dringir, that's where that comic really does shine. And then it ends strong, but Phase 3 has done it a lot better, and it's what's nice is that Phase 3 has ended one entire run of the comics. Then you get to Tempest Breaker and tie in all these plot points with adult books and young adult novels. and then once that story plays out however it does, then we're gonna have the second run called Fate of the Jedi, which, I'm excited for that because we get Kilnaka, we get to have a proper continuation of the story and what's gone on, and it's nice that it seems like that will be a audio drama that has real substance and meaning and almost will be like a Battle of Jakku for Phase 3, because Battle of Jakku is basically the second of of the three adult novels, right? It's not labeled as it, but it's the centerpiece of basically everything going on in
Yeah.
Phase 2. So
George
I,
Mann
I'm
again.
yeah, George Mann again. So I really do hope this will be something really important for the adult, for the young adult, maybe even the junior reader novels and comics and all that, and then kick us back into their respective mediums with connective tissue and fuel for sure. So yeah, no, I'm excited, and yeah, that's kind of where I'll leave it there.
Yeah, he's really been carrying it. And like even without giving anything away, Tears of the Nameless actually does a little bit of referencing to phase two, which is a nice welcome since we really
Yeah.
had nothing so far. Um, so yeah, it's a pretty
And
good book.
Echoes of
I'm
Fear has
excited to
been
finish it.
great as well, and that's super tied into Tears of Nameless, and that's a comic miniseries. So yeah, yeah, George Mann is just like, I will be the glue. I will connect everything that's necessary.
Yeah, it's like when everybody else burned out, he's saving the end of the initiative.
Yeah.
And we were looking the other day, and I've been saying this on our streams for a while, how I was very afraid with the announcements of the Acolyte books and the kind of rough Andor tie-in book, The Reign of the Empire. Um, I was afraid of what that meant for the release of the final High Republic adult novel because those were all early 2025 releases. And according to Wikipedia, I looked the other day and it has the final High Republic book coming out at the beginning of June, which is really a bummer because that's a whole year after the second book of Phase 3. I just feel like the way they've spread this out, whether it's behind the scenes problems or just they're trying to drag their feet to milk out as much High Republic content as possible, whatever it is, I've been pretty disappointed with the way High Republic Phase 3 has released. I feel like it's been kind of just uneventful because it's so spread out. You can't stay with the story. You constantly have to kind of refresh yourself on what happened last time. Where Phase 1 and Phase 2, I felt like the releases. I now again, I think Phase 2 is still kind of a mistake in that middle part, even if it was pretty good. Um, but I felt like the releases were at least exciting the way they dropped them. And right now, Phase 3 just feels kind of like everything's up in the air. You never know when something is actually finally going to come out, and then it's just kind of one random drop here, one random drop there. So hopefully the steam picks up as we start to get towards the end. Anthony says I also watched the sequel trilogy rewatch the sequel trilogy. Sorry. I actually saw a lot of cool connections that I did not see before, despite its flaws. I do love a lot of its concepts and always appreciate it for getting me into Star Wars a lot deeper at the ages of 11 to 14. Interestingly, when I was at the theater seeing The Rise of Skywalker, after the film had ended, the audience jumped up and started clapping and saying, "Yeah, that was awesome." I've never seen that much happiness in a movie theater before or since. Most of the people there were my age, teenagers, and in their early 20s. For me, Rise of Skywalker is probably my favorite, or my fourth or fifth favorite Star Wars movie, and my favorite of the sequel trilogy. Well, thank you for that. I'm glad you enjoyed your rewatch of the sequel trilogy. I usually rewatch it once a year at least, and yeah, for me, it always goes up and down. And certainly as a trilogy, it's gotten weaker almost every time I watch it. Rise of Skywalker, unfortunately, the same way. But it's undeniable the audience overall reactions when we see these movies on opening night for the first time with a lot of people. I mean, there's hardly anything that can prevent it from being an exciting opening night experience. That's why I can never actually, rate a Star Wars movie the first time I see it. I feel like when we finally get a Star Wars film, when Mando and Grogu finally comes out, I'm gonna have to see it like twice in the same night or once at
Kind
night,
of, yeah.
once the next day to make a real good grade on it, or review it once after the hype and then we review it and again like a week later and we're like, okay, I've watched it 5 times now. This is what I think. Um, but yeah, for me, that was the Force Awakens with like that experience you're describing with the Rise of Skywalker. Like I've never experienced anything like that in a movie theater. The crowd, the hype. I was in high school. It was my senior year of high school when Force Awakens came out, and I went with 30 classmates. I've told this story a bunch of times on the channel. I bought tickets for 30 people, and everybody, obviously paid me back. And then we all went to the movie, and it was the last day of our finals before winter break, and it was just such an incredible experience. Especially one of the last big memorable things with that group of people, that I had before we all went our separate ways off to school. And it's just an experience and a memory I look back very fondly on. It's one of the reasons why I'm certainly a little easier on The Force Awakens than the other two movies. And one of the reasons I still have such joy and love for The Force Awakens when I watch it, especially when I just watch it on its own. There's so much fun to be had in that movie, and a lot of it is around the experience that was opening night. And that was also pre-reserved tickets. So I was there, got in line at 6 in the morning, and it was freezing. And we were out there, and we had a DVD player, and we were watching the movie, or all the other movies, and people were having lightsaber duels, and it was so much fun. So yeah, I'll always look back fondly on the sequels, especially Force Awakens, for that time in my life, even if as that starts to wear off, that like, initial high, and start to look at the movies a little more critically, I have been a little more down on especially the second and third ones of the sequel trilogy, but it won't replace the good times I had initially with seeing all three of them. And the excitement around that whole thing.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same sentiment. I told the story a couple times too. I was just like in the Barnes and Noble next to my movie theater. I didn't see a line, and I was like, okay, yeah, I got some time. And I was like, okay, maybe I should start going over. And then I didn't realize they had behind the theater in the parking lot. They had already started like lining up people. I was like, oh my god! I'm like, I was here so early, and I was like, what's going on here? And I managed to get in. I was like one of the last two, three people that they allowed into the movie theater, and I was like, oh my god, I barely got in, and then the movie just wasn't working. The projector wasn't working. It was just so weird, and people were like yelling, they're like, "Get this going!" and all that, and it just suddenly shot on in the middle of the title crawl, and everyone just started cheering, and it was just like, yeah, and I think that was the funny thing for me is like everyone had a good time, and there were like some nice whoops and hollers, and obviously for like a lot of the legacy stuff. But I do vividly recall that my audience in that same, I don't know if it's the exact same theater in the movie theater, but uh, yeah, it was for The Rise of Skywalker. I remember the clapping. I remember everyone going crazy for bass boosted lightning. I remember like even the Battle of Kef Bir between Rey and Kylo, like that got a lot of hype and everything. Like people were really enjoying it. I think it's just a film that once it smacks you around, you're just like, all right, I'm here, I'm having fun. And then when you get to rewatch it, take breaks and all that, you're like, I don't know about this, I don't know about that. This should have been longer. And I've always advocated that it should have been in the year that Endgame gets a 3 hour film. Episode 9 doesn't, right? Like that never made much sense to me, especially because that would have helped JJ with the rush job that he had to do replacing Trevorov. It would have forced him to also use a little bit more of like maybe Ryan Johnson's scenes that he shot with Carrie Fisher for Leia and have her be a bit more of a character. Would have forced way more prequel connections because he's a little bit notorious for some of his dislike, and he really marketed The Force Awakens as like practical, getting away from the whole George Lucas PT aesthetic and everything that admittedly everyone was kind of saying publicly around the same time too. But yeah, I mean, I'll always remember that. I do admit though, it is a little frustrating for me that the full trilogy that I got to experience by The Last Jedi, like things changed. The online discourse started kind of going back to that episode one level of discourse, if not worse. Social media obviously is a lot more aggressive and crazier and more person facing, forward facing than the forum era of like the prequels and all that. So I think we can all say that we got a taste of that, and it still does dominate a lot of the Disney releases. And, that's what it's going to be. That's fair, but that trilogy has a lot of great things. It's very fantastical. It's very fun. it just really, really desperately needs a Clone Wars equivalent to pad out a lot of the connective tissue and a lot of the things that just don't make it a trilogy. There's 2 out of 3 good to great films in there. One of them that I think has plenty of lore and ideas that can be mined and harvested and already has been, but it needs something that desperately will connect it, right? You can argue episode 1 has 0 connective tissue, honestly, to episode 2 and 3, which are far more connected. But regardless, you have the Clone Wars, and the Clone Wars, especially earlier seasons, make a big effort to connect the stuff in episode 1 and references from that and some of the more sillier elements. And like, yeah, I hope we get something like that, even as scrunched up as the timeline is, only there being a 1-year gap. I hope that we're able to like tell stories before, during that 1-year gap, and then after the Rise of Skywalker, or maybe even concurrently. There's nothing wrong with that. We've had Ahsoka somehow get so much time in like 7 seasons of the Clone Wars, 3 years of war. You don't think we can have some stuff concurrently with the films? I'm plenty of franchises do it. So yeah, I'm glad that you got to see a little bit more positives, Anthony. I think everyone is starting to, I've noticed a little bit more of like appreciation for those films. Even if you don't love them as films, like, you know, you might love the lore, you might love the execution of like the lightsaber duels, stuff like that. I've been seeing kind of kick into gear a little bit more and more. And hopefully the Battle Jakku Maxi series is like a first gateway towards Mandoverse and all these other stories, kind of taking some foundational blocks for what's going to be there and setting up sequels and what's coming after the sequels and what's happening during the sequels that we haven't seen yet.
Critical Thinker says, "What are you guys' favorite obscure Star Wars background characters?" Well,
Oh.
if you know my history on the channel, you know this a favorite topic of mine for sure, and I have too many to even really name. Um, I did a video. I think it's still up on the channel. One of our first videos ever about my favorite Star Wars background characters, and oh god, if you go back and watch it, it's I mean, I think it's still fairly well made. It's just they look very different, and it's dated uh compared to the normal quality on the channel. But anyway, I talked about all my favorites, and a lot of mine favorites stem from the toys because I am and was I used to be more back in the day a big Star Wars toy collector. Now that the toys are so damn expensive and there's 30 different series and all these different things, I used to collect the 3 3/4 inch toys back when they were, you know, one series and you could collect them all. And I used to get them mostly at the flea market. And now that everybody wants an arm and a leg for them, and that in stores they're also ridiculously expensive, I'm not as into it. But back in the day, I was very into it, and I had, you know, every power of the Force, every power of the Jedi, every saga toy, like everything. And so I became kind of obsessed with all these different characters in the background that I could use when I was playing as a kid because I had to know their names so they could fit in the story. And so some of my favorites, you know, growing up, obviously the obvious ones like Jack Porkins or Wilbur Hood. There's another pilot called Grizz Fricks that I always thought was really funny. He's the guy that says she gonna blow when the ship's about to blow up in Return of the Jedi. Or Luleo Premick from Solo Star Wars Story, who's also a singer, gets one line, and his species actually was just in Outlaws, so they're bringing him back a little bit. But one of my favorites, who is actually a relatively big character in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I love this. I love that John Jackson Miller did that. Is Mosep Benid, who's like barely in the background of one scene in Jabba the Hutt's palace, which was pretty awesome. And as a Star Wars toy collector, I always liked a Manaman. And I love that species design, but that one was really hard to find. And also Yak Face Saddle Marie, pretty cool character. Cantina, a lot of great ones. I always was kind of partial to Boshik just because he looks like a, you know, just a standard human dude with a spacesuit on, like the most like 50s sci-fi costume in Star Wars. I like Boshik. And then another one from A New Hope. And a lot of the original trilogy has some of the great ones because that's when they were like just mining the movies for any person they could possibly make a story about or a figure about before there were prequels. Osleo Prinert, who, if you guys don't know Osleo Prinert, He's the guy who has his back to you when the X-wings all take off, and he's like scanning them in episode 4. That's a great one. So yeah, I could go on forever. But those are some of my favorites. I also like the cameo from Attack of the Clones of Anthony Daniels and Ahmed Best. Ahmed Best character is named Ahmed Beck, and then obviously that ties into his Jedi character now with Kelleran Beck. So there's some relations there, maybe family name. So yeah, some cool ones. But yeah, let us know what some of your favorites are. I would like to hear what you guys have to say about some of like the wackiest random characters in Star Wars. Oh, and I can't forget, of course, Droopy McCool, one of my favorite characters ever. I almost forgot him because I think of him as a protagonist. Yeah, Droopy and Max and Joe Yauza. Okay, I'll pass it to you now.
Yeah, I think for me it's always gonna be the classic of Wilbur Hood, you know, the ice cream machine holder maker thing, right? Um, but I do always love Davin Crail from the Trench Run, who's like saying, stay on target." And it's funny to me because he's not actually gold leader, but he's like almost in that moment, like swapped out, like he's the calm one. And as the actual gold leader's like, loosen up, like, and he's freaking out because he's about to die. And then he escapes, and then he's just like nonchalantly like, yeah, they're all dead. You know, it came from behind. It's like, okay. It's like, what, like, I can't imagine what his character was like if he was explored in any EU stories, but he must have been a bit of an oddball for people, right? So, yeah, definitely someone that, you know, I enjoy the more and more I get to watch him, right? But yeah, I think it's definitely those two for me.
Yeah, those are great ones. Back to the chat here, and we have no, Anthony already read that. Critical Thinker says favorite film directors. Oh God, that's another one that could be going
Uh,
forever. um, God, I don't even know if I can pick a favorite of all time. It's just every director is so different, and that's
yeah,
what makes a great director is that you have a stamp. Somebody like Steven Spielberg, even though he has a very much so a specific style and feel, especially tonal feel. Steven Spielberg can do pretty much any genre, and he's one of the rare filmmakers that can do pretty much everything and has done pretty much everything to an extremely high degree. Whether it's gripping, drama like Schindler's List, war film, Saving Private Ryan, action, sci-fi, horror, and Jaws. He's done everything. So, I mean, he has to be mentioned, but there's very few people like him who can do everything. But sometimes you don't necessarily need somebody who can do everything. Sometimes you want somebody who does something super, super obscure and stylistically unique. And for me, there are a lot of directors that I love that are like that. I mean, right now, I've talked about last week, and I'm going to talk about again right now. One of my favorites working right now is Robert Eggers. I love his style. I love the visual flair he brings to his movies. I just really, really appreciate him. But you could go on forever with, the Stanley Kubricks, Alfred Hitchcocks, um, Akira Kurosawa, who I've never seen a mediocre movie from him. Um, who else could I? Kobayashi. What's his name? Who did Human Condition? Masaki
uh,
Kobayashi. He has been one. Letterbox is in love with him, and I've watched his movies over the last couple of years. And Harakiri is the number one movie on Letterbox, and it absolutely deserves that spot. I don't think it's the greatest movie of all time, in my opinion, but it's a masterpiece. And so are all his other movies: Human Condition, Samurai Rebellion. There's so many great movies that he's done. So that's a great shout as well. Christopher Nolan was probably my pick for a very long time. I still love pretty much every movie he's ever made. And to me, at worst, his weakest movies, excluding his very low budget following movie, are all still like 3.5s or 4s out of 5. So he's an excellent director. God, I'm trying to think of more off the top of my head. But I'll pass it to you, Seneca, for a couple of your favorites, and I'm gonna keep thinking because I know I'm leaving out a lot of people that I really do love.
Yeah, I think for me, one of them, of course, will be Nolan. I think everyone goes kind of through this phase of like they love Nolan, and then they're like, "Oh, Nolan's overrated. He's not. He
Yeah.
doesn't make audible audio, and his characters aren't all there." And it's like valid criticisms. I won't fully entirely disagree with that, but then you like actually sit down and watch his filmography, and you're like, man, but he's a master at what he's doing and what he's trying to say, and everyone kind of gets back to an appreciation. It's great that he's finally kind of gone back to that emotionality that works in Interstellar and especially in Inception with obviously Oppenheimer. I mean, it also helps that Cillian Murphy's just so freaking good and Robert Downey Jr. is just so scummy. But yeah, like, yeah, just great stuff overall there. Very, very pleased by kind of what happens there. So yeah, I'm excited for his next one. There's rumors it's going to be like vampires set in the 20s, which isn't there like another one called Sinners coming out with Michael B. Jordan
Oh,
and
yeah.
Haley Steinfeld with Ryan Coogler. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure how this will work or if it's like in the same
Yeah, and Tom
area.
Holland's gonna be in the Christopher Nolan
Tom
one, I think they
Holland,
announced
Matt
today.
Damon. Yeah, that's gonna be really interesting because Tom Holland, everyone's been like, you're pushing 30, and the only thing you got to your name is Spider-Man and Uncharted, which I think is a shame because he's also been really good in that one Netflix film with Robert Pattinson. The what is it called? Devil something.
I
Oh
don't
man,
know.
I'm,
I don't
I'm
think I've seen
blanking
it.
on it. But I've heard good things about it, even if the story's not as good as it could have been. It's shot really beautifully, and it's the devil all the time from
Oh,
Antonio
okay.
Campos. Yeah, yeah. So people have a lot of really good things to say about that. I guess he was technically an onward to Chris Pratt, but that came out right as the pandemic hit, so everyone kind of forgot about it. Plus, it is basically a B tier Pixar film, really. So it's a little bit less of an original concept, more of just playing with tropes and stuff. But I'm excited for what he's gonna do, and I think the only other film that he's been in, like really been in and gotten to show himself and like what he does, is The Impossible, right? And Jay Bayona is great at doing like crazy cinematography and all that. So I'm I'm quite confident in that he'll finally get to do something with Nolan there. Another one of my directors that I've gotten to really, really appreciate every film I've seen of them is Sidney Lumet. Oh man, just 12 Angry Men obviously is a great one. But what is the other ones that I really like? Dog Day
Dog Day Afternoon.
Afternoon is awesome. I love Serpico. And then the one that I saw this year, that I think it was maybe the first film I saw this year that I just absolutely loved was Network. And Network is so timely.
Yeah.
It always hits during like, more media charge cycles of entertainment and all that, right? So yeah, big, big fan of that for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's definitely becoming one that I really, really like. I'll give credit to Greta Gerwig. I think I need to see one more film before she comes into like a top director for me. I know people love Barbie, but I can't outright say I love it. I thought it was pretty solid, but then anytime they were in the real life scenes, I just really hated that it just felt like a car ad half the time. It's just a shot pretty horribly compared to the rest of the film. The performances are solid, and I think that's what she really gets out of her actors. Obviously, what is that type of mumblecore filmmaking or whatever that
Mhm.
she was kind of like originally from as an actor. I think she still has a lot of those same elements really kind of push in with the personality, the quirkiness of the characters, the expressiveness, and it all really kind of comes through even with some of the zanier plots that she handles. I know she's like doing the Narnia films and now she's kind of complaining that like,
I'm
hey,
excited
I
about
need a
that.
theatrical release, right? Why are we just doing this on Netflix? Even at least do like a limited run here and there, right? And I don't blame her, right? But yeah, I really do, really, really, really do like what she's done as a director otherwise, because I love Lady Bird and I really love Little Woman. That is such an underrated film, and it's hard to say it's underrated because everyone loves it, but I still think it is quite underrated because it came out late 2019. Um, but I do like what her I don't know if they're husband and wife proper, but her partner, Noah
Yeah.
Baumbach, I actually really love his films. Marriage Story, I think, is a bit overrated, but I really, really do like. the Meyerowitz stories and Squid and the Whale. They're like just sharp and edgy films. Those I really do like. Just good stuff there. Obviously, Michael Mann. I love Thief. I love Heat. Like great stuff there. He's one of those directors that I think gets vibe and ambiance really well. I saw Miami Vice recently, which technically he worked on the TV show. He was the producer behind it, I believe. But then he like directed like a modern version with Jamie Foxx and Colin Farrell in 2005, and then he cast like Gong Ha, and she's a great Taiwanese or Cantonese speaking actor, but terrible in English for her that to be her debut. That's a difficult film to really handle, and but for such a very like digital focused film, he gets this very strangely slick and sleepy vibe that really works for like an updated version of Vice, which Miami Vice, the original TV show, was known for such high production values, and even with that being basically all camcorder footage and stuff like that, there's just something that worked in. I really do like him as like a technical director, but other than him, it's got to be Denis Villeneuve for me. I really love his
Yeah.
films. Obviously, Dune 1 and 2. I love Arrival. That one's really,
Prisoners.
really strong. Prisoners, Enemies, Sicario. Rumors that he might do Sicario 3 and kind of continue off of the sequel that came out afterwards that he wasn't involved in. Yeah, I am a huge fan of him. The moment I heard he was attached to Dune, I started reading Dune, right? And yes, I didn't really finish the book for like 3, 4 years, but once I heard about it, I'm like, this is the guy. This is the guy to do it. And we've seen so far from at least everything covering Dune Part 1, Part 2, he knows how to handle it. So very excited for Dune Messiah. I hope he continues just doing them like every 10 years and finishes off the rest of the Frank Herbert ones. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. Those are definitely some of my favorite directors.
Yeah, I've been scrolling through my letterbox to try to think of some more. But Bong Joon-ho, I would throw him out there. David Fincher in his prime, more specifically, but he has overall been pretty great. Ingmar Bergman, I've never seen a movie I haven't liked from Ingmar Bergman. I'd also throw out the Coen brothers. Really always enjoy their movies and their style. PTA, Paul Thomas Anderson,
Yeah,
usually
yeah.
pretty great. I didn't really like Licorice Pizza that much, but it was all right. Sam Raimi, really fun director. If you guys haven't seen Evil Dead, check them out. Um, let's see here, some other ones.
You guys know him from the original Spider-Man films, if that name doesn't ring a bell. And I
Yeah.
guess Doctor Strange too.
uh, Guillermo del Toro, somebody I've always really enjoyed, back from Blade 2 all the way to the present, winning Shape of Water. I actually really liked Shape of Water. I know a lot of people didn't like that movie. John Carpenter, Wes Craven, William Friedkin, Martin Scorsese. Haven't talked about him yet. Oh God, I'm gonna miss one that I really like, and I really want to shout out pretty much everybody. But yeah, I mean, I think if you have a holy trinity of directors for the most part, I think most people would throw up Kurosawa, Hitchcock, and Spielberg as maybe the three greats. Um, Kubrick, Kubrick, right there. Kubrick's maybe my favorite. I don't know. It's tough to pick because he doesn't really. I mean, he has a couple mediocre movies when you look at his or earliest movies, but when you look at pretty much everything he did post Paths of Glory, or which came first, Paths of Glory or Lolita, or God, what was the bank robbery one he did was actually really good. One of his early movies. Oh, Miyazaki, I'd throw that him up there, of course. Hideaki Anno, of course. Yeah, keep going on and on and on. I keep a lot of lists. I love to make lists, so I keep a lot of lists of my favorite directors, and that's what I'm kind of scrolling through right now to see if I missed anybody. But I think that's pretty much everybody. Of course, George Lucas, which actually George Lucas is an underrated director, because if you look at, I mean, obviously he only did 6 movies, and 4 of them are Star Wars, but all of them have a distinct visual flair. All of them have certainly a distinct writing style, um, but he is able to tackle kind of a more slice of life style genre, coming of age genre with American Graffiti, and also harder edge sci-fi with THX, which I really love THX. A lot of people haven't checked it out, and I think it is a shame. Certainly check it out. I think it's a really, really interesting, worthwhile film, especially, for a franchise that we all talk about all the time, enough for you guys to join us every single week for an hour and a half and discuss Star Wars. You see a lot of the early inspirations there. So definitely check that out. But yeah, could go forever. Thanks for the question. We probably should get back to the chat. Let us know what some of your guys' favorite movie directors are, because there are really infinite amount of choices. Critical Thinker also says, if you could write any Star Wars story whatsoever in either continuity, what would you go with? So this is kind of a variation, I feel like, of a question you asked before, about like what Star Wars projects would we want to lead if we were in charge of Lucasfilm. Um, for me, I haven't really thought too much about original Star Wars stories because it is something that's very far away if it ever happened. But in terms of adaptation, when I read all the time, I always think about adaptation, and how we can get certain stories in. And I think for me, the one I've thought about the most over the years and have a lot of ideas written down. I've intended to make it a video for a very long time, and I know it's going to take forever, so I haven't yet. But it is my consolidating of the Old Republic. It's something I've cared about for a long time. Probably even on, if I don't know if we still have those episodes up, but like some of the earliest episodes we ever did of this show, I've talked about that and Darth Bane, and combining that with the story of Revan and shrinking the period down. I have lots of ideas about that. So that would probably be the one that I would pick out of anything. It's just, an era obviously they haven't touched in Star Wars live action or animation or in Star Wars canon. And it's something I would really, really like to do. I think I have a really solid grasp and idea on how I would do it. So yeah, that would probably be the one. But I'd have to think about it for a while if I was going to write something original, something that hasn't been done, because I haven't really ever thought about it personally, where I would go with completely original characters. Now I've thought about where I would go, with the Solo kids or Rey or all these other characters to continue Star Wars, but I haven't thought about starting from scratch ever with Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, like Liam said, this is definitely a question that we get a lot in some form or another. So I'm not trying to spend too much time on it, but like I said, I do want to tackle kind of a dark ages of the galaxy with like New Sith Wars kind of tries to do, but it's kind of picking up the pieces and setting up the stage for what's going on with the Bane trilogy and all that. I never really tries to explore like what Knight Errant is hinting at, like everything was destroyed and communications, technology, and all that was set back. I think that's a great story that I'd be really appealing to do, and I think it would work in very different ways, obviously with legends and canon. But I still think for the most part, yeah, I'd write it the same. I would just be a little bit more cognizant of what the High Republic is trying to do as like almost like a Renaissance period for the galaxy. But yeah, I think that would be something I would really like to write a little bit more about and stuff like that. So, um, I mean, I've been saying I want to see the Luke's Jedi Order be animated so you can get the full range of Mark Hamill and bring in characters that don't necessarily have to jump like a crazy medium from like a comic all the way up to live action. They'd be able to be like video game to animated show or book to animated show. That's definitely something I want to see happen. And ideally, I'd like to see that happen at least a season or two before Rey's new Jedi Order film comes out. So that way the comparisons don't be like, oh, obviously Luke did it better and Rey's just copying. Like they're going to be different. And I think anyone arguing that they're going to be the same or like Rey's just going to do exactly what Luke did, it's silly because also the Jedi Academy trilogy is not great. Kevin J. Anderson lets Kip Durron get away with a lot of stuff that the galaxy, especially written in canon, would be like, no way, man, you're gonna be like killed or hung or something. Like this is messed up. I don't care if you can use the Force and if Exar Kun spirit was messing with your head or whatever, right? So, I'd love to see what Luke faces, and I've been always saying that the story of Luke and his order, I do think he'll be successful. I do think he'll show crazy powers like he does in The Last Jedi and all that. I just think that it's going to be more ideological differences and more struggles with bureaucracy, struggles with for Order 66 survivors, which, obviously Legends, Bantam era had no chance of writing about. They had that whole era kind of shunted off. And that's kind of the nice thing about being able to fill in the gap now. You got stuff before and after that can really feed and shape the story you're going to tell while still allowing you to be really creative. And yeah, I mean, those would be probably like my two biggest ones I definitely want to do. Um, I, I don't know, man. There's so much of a time. I'd love to eventually see something like the Ninth Jedi esque, where it's like 100, 200,000 years ahead in the future. But I still think we need to flesh out all the connective tissue possible to the Skywalker saga and new eras that don't necessarily rely on them more less and less, right? Like they become less and less of figures, or we're building up to them less and less. And I hopefully, we'll start getting swings like Acolyte again, but that actually use their money really well, that usually have big sets that feel HBO level. Because I don't know, man, the budget for the Penguin from what I'm reading is lower than the Acolyte, and it's not like
Yeah.
it's got cheaper actors, not at all, right? It's just something that Disney has not leveled up its game, and that doesn't make sense to me because they've shown that they can, especially with Mando season 1 and 2. I don't know what Hollywood budgeting is always weird, but that more than anything else with the story execution, all that, it's been my frustration that we put that much money into the Acolyte and it had gone so far away from what was originally pitched as and all that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to what we see in the post Chapek world. I'm looking forward to 2023 Star Wars Celebration and how that shapes the rest of the Star Wars movie and TV show universe and stories that come out of that, and especially the adjustments that have already been made, all right, with a Mandalorian and Grogu instead of a Mando season 4 and stuff like that.
Well, we've reached about that time where we're going to start wrapping up our show here soon. We could go for another, 15, 20, 30 minutes, but we will wrap up before 2 hours. So if you guys have questions or comments you want to make sure you get on the show, you see where we are in the chat. Send in a super chat, helps out the channel greatly, and it makes sure it guarantees your question gets on the show. And we also have a lot more people watching right now than have liked the video. So please like the video if you could. And then also, if you're new, subscribe and join us every single week. We do this every single Tuesday. All right, back to the chat here. And we have, let's see, where were we? We're at Anthony, who says, have you guys ever seen the Batman versus Dracula movie or read Batman Red Rain? I have seen it and I have read it. Um, and the movie is actually really good. It's underrated for sure amongst early DC animation before they had this very tiresome DC animated universe that they're doing right now. But kind of in that transitionary phase, the Batman Dracula movie was in the art style of the Batman show, which was the show after the original Bruce Timm stuff ended. And I never really loved that show. It's good. It's one of the better ongoing Batman shows, multiple season Batman shows, but it's not it's series level. So I never loved that show, but I actually really like the movie. I think it's pretty good. And as far as the comic, I feel like it is one of the more overrated Batman comics, to be honest. But as it goes with Elseworlds, it's solid. It's solid. I liked it. I just always used to see it on lists of like the greatest Batman stories of all time. And I personally didn't really find it in there. Like, I don't even know if it cracked my like top 30 or top 40, but it's good. It's a fun read. I I've gotten into, cheesy horror and more horror tropes, so much over the last 5, 6, 7 years that when I read it initially, I might just not have been, it might have been based on a style that I wasn't necessarily used to. So I'd like to give it a second chance. But when I first read it, I just kind of thought it was all right. I didn't think it was a top tier Batman story.
Can't say I've read it or watched it, so that's a question for Liam.
Anthony also says, I really need to read the Battle of Jakku comics, and then Halloween is next week. I'm very excited. Yeah, me too. I'm very excited. I'm very sad because even though I could still watch horror after Halloween's over, it just doesn't necessarily feel right. It feels like I should transition out of it, but definitely not wanting to stop anytime soon. Chris Schober says, "Do you think we might get more Luke Skywalker news soon or no?" That's a good question. I don't think we're gonna get any news anytime soon. I think the earliest you'd hear anything about Luke Skywalker, if you're talking about The Mandalorian specifically, is when we either get to the movie, if he makes a cameo or something. But I would guess more specifically around the Ahsoka season 2, post Ahsoka season 2, build up to Filoni's movie, if that's still happening, a culmination kind of this whole New Republic story around the Mandalorian, because they're going to have to do something with Luke in that, whether he's in it or not. They need to at least give us some more information about Luke. So I think that's the next time we'll hear about him in terms of a live action film. Now we all keep hoping that there's a Luke animated show, or I really would like a live action show with Mark Hamill that takes place closer to The Force Awakens, about Luke's new Jedi Order and his Jedi Academy. But I don't know. Those are all, fan hopes. There's nothing in the rumor cycles about it. So, um, again, if there was a surprise announcement, it would be probably Star Wars Celebration next year. But if it doesn't come then, then just keep hoping every Star Wars Celebration we get something. Otherwise, I would say you're probably going to have to wait till 2026, 2027 to hear anything about Luke's future.
Yeah, it is like we said, like, and I was kind of alluding to at my point last time I spoke at length, and it seems like the 2023 celebration is still like the general blueprint, but they are definitely making adjustments to it. Uh, Obviously a much more concerted effort to go straight into movies instead of Disney Plus shows and then occasional movies, which is great because I'd love us to return back to a Star Wars story. I never loved the name. It was called what was the original name? It was like Star Wars Anthology or something else.
Yeah,
There's
before
an
a Star Wars story. Yeah,
yeah,
it was
and
a
I
Star
always
Wars
prefer
anthology.
I always preferred Star Wars Anthology over a Star Wars story, but
Me too.
like it's not the or that people who are used speaking English as their second language or third language are gonna necessarily know right off the tip of the tongue. So I understand that, but anyways, I digress. I think that 2023 celebration slate is still the base of that, obviously, and then the adjustments being made for sure. But Luke is someone that I think they're gonna have to take some serious considerations because I think the plan was to deep fake him, use him in little cameos and little scenes, maybe an episode or two here and there. But now that we're moving to like movies, you can functionally go with the character and spend a lot of money and justify like more of a deep fake version of what we got with Tarkin in Rogue One, where it is like full mocap, everything else, and then you get to have a little bit more oriented stuff. But even that, right? Even with just using the traditional CG methods, it's not a very action oriented role. He's just talking. It's more delivery. It's more punctuation. So whatever Luke's gonna do, he's gonna have that wizened moments, I would assume, right, of post Return of the Jedi Luke. But I do think a recast is coming. I just don't think it's coming quite yet. We have to obviously get Ahsoka season 2 news. Ahsoka season 2 is rumored to deal with Thrawn and stuff, so maybe you can get a cameo there of sorts to have like a Jedi on one side of the galaxy, a Jedi on another. It would definitely frustrate Thrawn to be like the apprentice of Skywalker was his, I beat her, I outwitted her in my great escape, and then he ran straight into Luke Skywalker and Ezra Bridger, who is rumored to be in Mandalorian and Grogu. So it'll be interesting if that's what'll force a recast because you want to have Amonis Fondi's Ezra Bridger interact and train and duel and stuff like that. I don't know if that's going to happen per se, but I think a recast of these original trilogy characters, even if it's only for one singular movie and we'll still do deep fakes until that moment, I think it's happening. I don't think it's gonna be deep fake for much longer just because AI in filmmaking has also been a pretty hot topic question for a lot of us and debate for the last year or so. So that's coming. I just don't see the news coming soon. And I know Liam's always advocated, let's get some books, fill in the gaps for what we've been missing. And yeah, I think that's a great idea. I hope that the biggest, most explosive stories are told on the big screen for Luke, right? We get at least a film where he's a big supporting character, and then he gets to have maybe the Mandalorian and Grogu have like a pivotal scene or two. But get some books transitioning us straight from Battle Jakku into where he is at the start of Manaverse and what we haven't seen and what he's doing until the Book of Boba Fett. I think it'll be great to get stuff like that for him, Leia and Han and Chewbacca and Lando. But I think what'll be really, really interesting is to see where he lands by the end of Battle Jakku Maxi series. Already the second issue has him kind of reckoning with his identity that he kind of wants to be. I think we're gonna get some soft retcons of the whole attachments and everything that he kind of forces Grogu to decide. Maybe that choice is specifically for Grogu as opposed to himself and other Jedi that he's gonna train and all that. But we are starting. I think we are. The Battle Jakku being willing to tie in everything like Aftermath, the defunct Star Wars Uprising game, threads that are rumored to be continuing from Charles Soule 2017 Vader, Shattered Empire. It's happening. It's definitely happening. I think once that's done, we'll start seeing like a roadmap for what sticks for that character, and it will definitely be film oriented.
Anthony says, I have this concept of a Sith technocracy that I've been developing for a while. What do you guys think of the concept of a non-force sensitive Sith Lord who knows how to use a lightsaber and uses technology, science, and technology as a weapon, and this Sith Lord is the Sith Emperor? The Sith technocracy would still use the rule of two, but the apprentice does not have the ability to kill the master, but the master can voluntarily step down if he sees himself to be old or incompetent. They can also serve as an advisor to the new Sith master. Also, the Sith apprentice challenges their master's intellect and scientific wit, not force powers. Emotions are seen as weak, as they see Sith to be emotional, and that cause them to be unstable. Finally, the Sith Lords would not pursue immortality because they would see how the past Sith either failed to gain it or were defeated, such as Vitiate or Sidious. True immortality for these Sith is their technological, scientific, and engineering legacy. Legacy is truly immortal. That's a very interesting concept. I think in general, it sounds pretty darn cool. I mean, it sounds very Star Trek to me in a lot of ways. But I think, I don't necessarily think you have to make them Sith. I mean, I guess, I understand where you're going with it, where you're like, you want to have a Sith Emperor and all that. Um, but it can definitely be a kind of an offshoot Sith, like we've talked about in the past, though, like one Sith, or you see the Lost Tribe of the Sith. There's certain sides of the Sith that have been semi offshoot dark side groups. You could maybe take that idea and remove the Sith aspect from it, but make them, inspired by the Sith. I mean, I kind of get that that's where you're going in general, and obviously exactly Sith and their dogma. But I think it's an interesting approach to have, a logical based, not organism, but group of people where they're built on thinking logically, appreciate that the Sith ideology is the more productive route to go, which I think in general it does fit a bit more with a technocracy, because they wouldn't have any reservations or morals about, necessary. But a lot of what makes Sith is not just their direction, their goals. It's their pathology and the way they feel and the way they fight and the way they embrace emotions. So I think kind of juxtaposing that and looking at both and seeing how you can compare and contrast them could make a pretty interesting idea. But thank you so much for sharing. I love when you guys pitch your ideas to us. It's always very, very fun to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea. I think me personally, I just definitely appreciate it that the Sith are their own undoing more so than necessarily the Jedi outright defeating them. Quicker, easier. Does definitely feel like something that could lend itself to technology for sure and a technocracy. Uh, and like Liam was saying, like with the one Sith, like one thing that I wish the one Sith really took advantage of, especially since Star Wars Legacy starts off with them, is Vong and Vong Tech, Vong forming, and all that. I wish like we could have seen the one Sith kind of like it seems like they can almost kind of grow their lightsaber handles from like bones and stuff like that. But it would have been cooler to me if it was like actually the Vong and stuff like that. But it never really does happen, and that is a little unfortunate to me. But I do think in my mind that the technocracy elements that you're talking about really do line up with like more Star Wars: The Old Republic Sith, who are like using everything like biochemical weapons and augmentations for their body and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it works. Don't get me wrong. I think it's just it's not used in periods of time where the Jedi are, for sure in power, for sure the leading force. I mean, if Palpatine didn't defer to it, I don't see it working. I think it's more when it's like almost like a 50-50 fight that it really makes a lot of sense because they're trying to use every shortcut they can. But I do like the idea. I really do. I think also if you want like almost like a canon equivalent of that idea, you can look up the Dr. Aphra comics that have the Ascendant, especially the second line. Uh, and yeah, that one is pretty interesting how they have these like this group hunted down by the Sith because they're like, what are you doing? You're trying to mimic our powers and you're working together for the collective and all that. And it's pretty fun. I'd say I was pretty shocked concept wise because that I will say that when it first came out, and I'm not talking about the Kieran Gillen run, I'm talking about the second one from Alyssa Wong and their run. And Alyssa, I don't think started off as hot as Kieran ever did, but once the Ascendant kind of comes into play, and you start bringing in like Marvel comics with uh, the Tag family and Domina Tag and how she's always kind of push proto sabers and stuff like that, even in those old Marvel comics, to like fight off the Sith and Jedi, whoever have the power that's usually predisposed to them, right? I thought that's when their writing got really, really strong. So yeah, I would say check that out if you want to see something, or at least the visuals of a technocracy in play. But yeah, great ideas.
Critical Thinker says, while I liked unifying Force, I do think some of the ideas about the Force and the Jedi strayed a little too far from the film's ideas for me. Trader's ideas were more in line with the films. Yeah, and that's fair too. I mean, I think unifying Force, like we kind of mentioned earlier, and like you said, it is such like a build up. It's the Avengers Endgame of the entire Bantam era, plus then now the New Jedi Order. I think they incorporate a lot of ideas um, from around the wackier Force power side and wackier ideas about the Force that you see around Bantam. But yeah, Matthew Stover might understand the Star Wars movies lore better than almost anybody. Like I think James Luceno is an encyclopedia, and sometimes he reads like an encyclopedia in good ways and bad ways. But and then Zahn understands the original trilogy extremely well. But Stover just it's unreal his grasp on character and feel and tone. And so yeah, it's hard to beat anything he writes.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And I can see the critical thinkers talking about how traders are more about how the dark side is a result of your actions rather than an outside force puppeteering you to do bad things, which seems more in line to the films to him. And then unifying forces a step further and argues balance is half light, half dark, whereas the movie, the light side is balanced and the dark side is the imbalance. And yeah, I agree. I think unifying force, I don't think Lucino is necessarily trying to like outright say it's like it is like you're balancing. It's more, I think in my mind, his intention was more to say like balance the good and bad parts about you, and then instead of being so rigid to dogma, so rigid to principle, especially after the more darker things the Jedi definitely have to do during the New Jedi Order, the choices that they have to make, right? And I think that makes sense for where it is in the story. I will say it's nice that the other series kind of start undoing and kind of revert back to more of that traditional thinking, like you're saying. I don't know if Lucina would have written that if he wrote the book today. I think Lucas and the Lucasfilm Story Group would have been like, not really, not really, right? That's not the move. And I mean, that was the thing that was definitely criticized, New Jedi Order, as much as people enjoyed it and as much as it was a bestseller. People did feel like it really did stray from a lot of established ideology and principles that Lucas was definitely founding his stories in. So unifying force, as great of a story as it is, I think it works for me, and that kind of philosophy works, was because it almost feels like it's written as the end, right? We don't know how that's explored. We don't know exactly what that turns into past that point. Obviously, it wasn't uh, explored that well. Electric Judgment is probably one of the worst examples of that in my mind, of that unifying force belief, and it's definitely walked back pretty quickly. But it's not terrible. But I agree. I agree. I do like the movie version better, and I do like how canon has almost taken it a step further and been like, anything with the dark side, it's like a drug. It's cancerous. Once you have a taste of it, it's like you're an addict. It's almost hard to like get off of it. You don't know when you're going to relapse on it. It is that discipline. It is being around the right people and that support and all that. And that is something that I think also amplifies the PT Jedi, like the prequel trilogy Jedi. Like, they might have done all the right things by dogma, but were they actually in balance? Were they actually caring about innocent Jedi growing up in that system that hasn't really been changed for years and it's been run by especially long living species like Yoda, right? Especially in Anakin Skywalker with his mother, who's still a slave on Tatooine. Those questions of, is he not the chosen one, right? It not like, really being a support system and like making sure that he can embrace some of the darker elements of himself and then find the balance from that, right? That does, I think, in retrospect, definitely help a lot of the characterization, at least what canon has been doing. But again, it is Legends. Some of the things don't always work. Some of the things I think are ambitious to a fault, and I can see people saying that concept is maybe one of those cases of the latter.
Brendan Tran says, have you guys watched any of the big superhero shows like The Boys season 4, Batman, Cape Crusader, Agatha All Along, and Penguin? I have not. I've watched Penguin. I'm a couple episodes in. I'm trying to catch up so I can watch it weekly. I have not caught up on Agatha yet. I want to do a binge. Eventually, I will because I've seen everything MCU. I still haven't watched. Oh, that was the only thing I haven't watched. I'll have to do an Echo Agatha watch. But I really want to watch Batman Cape Crusader. But as I've said so many times over these last few weeks, I don't do anything this time of year besides watch horror movies. So once November 1st hits, I'll try to catch up on some of these things, especially because I do want to do a new ranking for Marvel because I haven't done one of those in a while. So I'll have to catch up on Agatha and Echo. But yeah, Batman I heard was great. And I love animated Batman. So I've got to check that out. But Penguin is really good. I've liked it so far. It's a couple episodes in. Certainly a build to something bigger. But I like the pacing. I like the structure. And Colin Farrell as Penguin is so damn good. He was great in the Batman, and he just keeps getting better.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of it. I've heard good things about Batman, the Cape Crusader. I know people don't necessarily love its like 40s Batman-esque storytelling. I know some people complained about like swapping Penguin from a man to a woman and its adaptation, but it's not meant to be mainline Batman adaptations. It's meant to like explore the concepts and take it back into the past and have fun. And I know people have both praised and criticized Harleen Quinzel in it because it's a little bit more of like a psychopath genius as opposed to like the funny, goofy version that we really get in the animated series, and that evolves into the one we see in the Arkham series before we've kind of gone into this new version of the Harley Quinn that's more tied into what Poison Ivy is more of like misunderstood and abused by Joker as opposed to being almost like his equal, right? It's very interesting. I know a lot of DC fans kind of look at Harley Quinn as a before and after, where she's gone from you know, like a companion and equivalent to a hot topic girlfriend that, we support women's wrong sort of character, which I think they're both valid. But I'm very curious if one day some comic book writer will find a way to balance both of those sides. I think the closest has maybe been the Arkham games, but I don't know. This might be a hot take. I don't really love the aesthetic of the Arkham games with a lot of the villains. Not, I like the Joker. I don't think they get. I don't really like the Harley Quinn design in my mind. So that's just me, and I feel like she's not used as well as I'd hope. I actually like her in the Lego Batman games more than anything else. But yeah, yeah, I'm curious to see. I know people really liked or were like, this is not even either version of Harley Quinn and Cape Crusader. So I'm looking forward to watching it. I think they have a season 2 already in the works, so pretty excited for that. It's on Amazon too, so they've been hitting home runs with animation recently with Invincible and stuff like that. So yeah, Invincible's coming soon, season 3. I think it's in February, and they've even their teasers also mocking themselves in a self-deprecating way for like mid-season break that completely broke the flow of season 2. They're like, we're not doing that again for sure. So I'm looking forward to that. I think they're also teasing a Rex special or Rexplode special, same way as Adam Eve, and I'm excited for that because I've heard he's got a pretty interesting backstory as well. Have not seen the Penguin yet. After this is over, I'm planning on finally starting that. I'm pretty excited. People have told me episode 4 is like the one that's like, oh my god, like this is where it levels up. So I don't know if you've reached that point quite yet, but I've heard episode 4, Christina, I don't know her last, Melitoli or uh, I forget. I
That's
forget how.
Maliati, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I know she's in she's the character in How I Met Your Mother, the wife, and that's teased for like the whole run. But she was actually really good in this film with Andy Samberg that came out during COVID called Palm Springs, which
Yeah.
I really like because it's kind of like a Groundhog's Day film. So I've heard her
Mhm.
acting is incredible, opposite Colin Farrell. So really looking forward to starting that. I am gonna watch Agatha next. I've heard really good things too. Not as good as Penguin, but people are like very surprised and happy. And it seems like we're kind of setting ourselves up for a WandaVision, Agatha all along, Vision Quest, White Vision show that's gonna be like a nice little WandaVision trilogy on Disney Plus, and that will probably be the biggest success of the multiverse era on Disney Plus for sure. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to watching that. I also have not seen Echo. But I'm not planning on watching Echo until I finish all the Netflix TV shows first. So that way I can watch Echo as like a bridge show going into Daredevil Born Again.
I'm sure that'll be a really exciting bridge show. I've heard. I haven't seen Echo. I just heard
I've
nothing but
heard
bad things.
okay things, but I heard it's
Um,
very, very different from her comic counterpart.
yeah, I'm not really excited at all. I mean, when they announced that, I thought it was a terrible idea. But now it seems to have come out and seems to be an afterthought. Agatha, I've also heard pretty good things about Agatha, but I'm holding out hope until you get that last episode of a Marvel Disney Plus show. I can't rely on the fact that it's good for the first 6. So we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. But yeah, Brandon's asking about The Boys. I've only watched like half of season 1. I just never finished it. And now that it's 4 seasons, which for me is a lot of TV to catch up on, as somebody who doesn't really ever watch TV, I don't know when I'll catch up on it. Probably will be when it's over. Uh, but one day, maybe one day. I never say never. Because for me, it's all about just starting it. Once I start a show, I usually get hooked. But I, I can't force myself to start a show because usually I am deciding to watch something maybe like an hour before I should be going to bed, and then I end up staying up for 2 hours. So yeah. Anyway, thank you for that question. And we have time for maybe one more as we're wrapping up the show. So our next one is going to be Critical Thinker talking more about Dark Nest, and then says, this is a solid one to end it on. What would you want to see an animated or live action Chiss Ascendancy show featuring Eli Vanto? Yes, 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 a million times yes. I would love that. I would love anything Chiss Ascendancy related, and I would absolutely love it if they did something that connected to the Thrawn we see in Ahsoka. And what's their communication been like? What are the Chiss doing? I really, if you guys watch some of our streams from like a year ago or plus, when we were doing the video game streams, I was convinced that we're gonna get a Thrawn or a Zahn announced book series at some point, or at least one book announced somewhere in connection with Ahsoka, because Zahn wrote the whole Ascendancy trilogy, and then he wrote the other 3 Thrawn books that tied so closely into Rebels, and we always heard about him talking about, oh, I'm working with Filoni on crafting this version of Thrawn, and all of that for the original 3 Thrawn books for canon. And I was like, yeah, for sure we're gonna get something that connects the end of Thrawn treason with where we are in the Ahsoka book, some type of Thrawn book from when he's in the other galaxy, some type of ascendancy book that builds up and connects from when Thrawn goes into exile all the way through the original trilogy and into the part of the Mandalorian timeline. But we got nothing. And so if for some reason they were saving it for some type of show, that would be awesome. I don't think they are because these would be brand new characters unless you started it, post Thrawn re-arriving in our galaxy from Peridia. I don't think you get that because you need some type of character that would lead the show. It would be awesome. And if Ahsoka season 2 blows up or whatever Thrawn's next in blows up and he becomes, the villain he's been for so many of us in the books, but for, newer audiences, because a lot of people didn't really love Thrawn in the Ahsoka show, if he becomes that in live action, what he was in the books, then maybe we could get some type of spin-off involving the Chiss, but as of now, it doesn't really seem like a possibility, but I would love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, Eli is always going to be a character that I think should be elevated, but it really does feel like we're trying to lean onto the EU kind of connection with Thrawn, with Pelion. There's rumors of another Rook kind of being brought into canon, so that way Rook is just like the name of the primary bodyguard, which I think can work. I think that'd be pretty interesting. That way you can still have your Rebels version and then Heir to the Empire inspired version that does a little bit more here. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm excited. I'd like to see that story continued. My thinking though is that they're gonna definitely be just do a post Mandoverse Thrawn trilogy or concurrent with more of a Chiss focus, like Arlani and all these people, and that they hear about what's going on with Thrawn, and then they're picking up the pieces, and that's where Eli will kind of come into focus, and maybe him and Pelion either butt heads or work together moving forward. Because I still do believe, no matter what happens, Pelion also makes it out. He just is too fun of a character to just end with Mandoverse, just like he is in EU, and I think there's much better ways of using him instead of like every 10 years he kind of pops into the story like he does for everything post Bantam. But yeah, and I think it'll be interesting however they handle it. I still truly wish the next Thrawn trilogy had been announced at this point and it would be written to cover at least one book covering the stuff on Peridia with Thrawn, the grandmothers, and Ezra. But maybe they're saving some of those details for the show for a little bit more of like a mature, edgier Ezra to come out from instead of like Rebels season 3, season 4 Ezra was photocopied and pasted and perfection when Amon Fondi with Ahsoka. And I get some people saying they don't really like Thrawn in the Ahsoka show. It's fair. He's not the military genius and all that, but with how little his resources are, it always made sense to me that he's gonna put himself into the most advantageous situation, which he did obviously with the grandmothers. He used the pawns that he had, the sacrifices that he needed to make. Could have been executed better. Yeah, I don't like the blocking at all and the castle. Basically, there's that one shot of all three of Sabine, Ezra, and Ahsoka, and it just looks like they just start moving the lightsabers and twirling. I think that's where Filoni definitely needs to develop, and with his cinematography team and with his direction for sure. But I think Thrawn worked for me. With what he's been given, right? It worked, and it's not like you're ignoring some of the stuff from the books, like Thrawn alliances. Thrawn has a very visible reaction to finding out that Ahsoka is Anakin's Padawan, right? So there's very clearly references being made and detail put there from Zahn that's going to play into the characterization. I just think you have to accept that the Ahsoka season 1 version that we're going to get from him is the one that realizes I've been here for 5-6 years. I don't have any resources. Half of my guard could be undead zombies for all we know. We don't know if the guy with who's the guy with the gold mask plate? His
Yeah, Captain something.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I was he's supposed to be played by one of the guys from The Expanse. Goldfish Trooper, Ahsoka. Captain Enoch, right? And he's
Yeah.
supposed to be in line for a bigger role. We don't know if he's been alive or he's already dead, right? Like there is that whole question of that. So if anything, it might be surprising if there's only like of his 100 troops left remaining, he only has like 10 that are actually alive, right? That his Star Destroyer was put together with Night Sister magic, but that's only being held together by the grandmothers. And once they leave, he needs to actually start using the shipyards and rebuild the Chimera and stuff like that. We don't know those details, but I think whatever comes next will definitely flesh out and make it more clear that he used every card he had left. And honestly, there weren't that many left. And he scraped by and he was like, I'm gonna hit Ahsoka with some slander, make fun of her, call her a Ronin Jedi, and dip out of the galaxy. And then whatever we get in the main galaxy, that's going to be more heir to the Empire. That's going to be more like the Thrawn trilogy about canon and legends, where he is a stupendous tactician. And yeah, I think we're just jumping a little too ahead because, admittedly, the Ahsoka show ended a bit soft with its last 2 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are gonna fall in love with Thrawn. They have to.
Yeah.
Everything's built on the backs of it, so they're gonna do everything possible. I would be shocked if he doesn't show up in some capacity at the end of the Mandalorian and Grogu. I think for sure he needs to at least be a Thanos for Avengers 1 in Mandalorian Grogu. You need to have some type of overarching threat. They're basically starting over, like we've said. They're basically gonna be like, hey, for all of those you've watched Mandalorian, here are some winks and nods and updates on things you've watched in season 1 through 3 and Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew and Boba Fett. For those people who haven't, they're going to start from scratch and give you a fresh Mandalorian experience and reintroduce who the villains are and what's the world and what's going on. So, yeah, it's going to be if Thrawn is going to be that big bad for the entire thing like he was supposed to be, they are going to have him in the film in some capacity, and hopefully he just keeps getting better and better and better. But that's going to wrap up our stream for tonight. Thank you so much for everybody watching this week's stream. Make sure, again, if you're new or you're watching on replay, join us every single Tuesday. We go live around 7:30 Pacific time, and we answer all of your guys' questions and run down the latest news topics. So join us every single week. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Subscribe for more great content. Thank you so much for watching this week's stream, and we will see you all next week. Good night, everybody.